did a project on a container ship. I pasted a giant container ship in Le Havre, one of those boats that's like 380 meters long with 14,000 containers. The idea was to make the story travel of one of the women that I had photographed from Kenya. I never thought it would be possible to do something like that, and it's actually the dockers of Le Havre, of one of the biggest ports in Europe, that told me that they could help me find those containers, paste them if I would find a ship. So I wrote a letter to different shipping companies. The first one who replied, which was CMA-CGM, told me that if the dockers were behind me and they could load them on one of their boats, they would make sure I could have one side of the boat. So we did it. What was incredible is that the dockers have been helping for 2 weeks to paste all those containers, and to see the port leaving and all those little pixels moving. When the boat arrived, they started installing it. And you should have seen that. It's just like a magical moment where they actually place the image on the side of the boat while they are loading other containers. And I remember we couldn't make the boat leave that night because it was too late and we couldn't have a good image. So we waited all night until the morning. And in the morning, the boat left all the way to Malaysia. So I know I would never see it. So those images say now, that's also the last time that I've ever seen the boat. But a couple months after that, I heard through one of the dockers that maybe my boat had encountered some migrants in distress call in the middle of the ocean between Libya and Italy. And I couldn't really believe it because no one had told me. So I called the port, I called the container company, I called everybody, no one knew about it. I actually emailed the assistant of the captain, which we stayed in touch. And she wrote us and she said, yes, we were there, we were the closest boat to a little embarkation of 250 people who were about to die in the middle of the ocean. So the Italian Coast Guard asked us to come in and rescue. So we had to stop the boat, but to stop a boat like that, it takes like a kilometer. I asked her if she had any photo, and she sent us all those photos where you see those people entering the boat in the middle of the ice. Later on, the press found out the story and found out how many people exactly were saved. But really, that's the moment where I decided to go in Syracuse, where the boat then dropped them in Sicily, and to go in Lampedusa and all those islands in Lesbos, where migrants try to reach the coast of Europe. When I came back to New York, where I live, I went and visited Ellis Island, which I knew, but I know Ellis Island used to be the place where migrants arrived. And when I went there, I noticed that there were a part of the island that had never been touched. Not the part that you can visit. There's a little tunnel you take and you go on the other side of the island, and this is a hospital where people were put in quarantine, and it's totally abandoned since it closed in the 50s. I got access to it. When I went there, I remember the spookiness of that place that's never been visited. And I asked them if I could paste photos from migrants, kids and family who came there from all parts of life, from all over Europe, that were in the archive of the Museum of Ellis Island. And I finally got the authorization and paste those people almost like ghosts inside the buildings. I remember when we did it, we thought nobody would ever see it. We did a film to document it so that people could actually see it. But then later on, they said, okay, maybe we could welcome public if they wear a hard hat to make sure that nothing falls on them. You can actually visit it. It's called the Hard Hat Tour. I did travel around the world to see refugee camps. The first one I saw was Zaatari camp in Jordania at the border of Syria. And at that time, I didn't know yet on scene how to paste such a giant image. We gathered kids to create this giant heart. I always wondered from that time, what could I do? How could I implicate communities there? How could I create something with the kids, with that energy that is vibrating in the camps, of all those children who don't exactly know where they're going to be moving, where's the future for them? The project that you're about to see here called Displaced started, I guess, in my mind there. But in my head, I was like, I have to find a way to do images without pasting them. Because in a lot of places where we went, we couldn't paste, there was not the place to paste, or sometimes, like in Ukraine where we started the project, the war was going on, and so we couldn't actually paste, we had to find another technique. And the technique came to me in Italy actually, when I did this project to support local farming with Alice Horpacher, which is a good friend and an amazing film director from Italy. We did this project called Omelia Contadina, where we printed giant farmers who are still alive, but we carried them like if it was their funeral. and then we buried them. I realized the power of having the whole community carrying the image. It's really when the war started in Ukraine, where I was like, okay, from Paris I could drive there. This is the first time such a conflict is happening so close to me that I could actually take my car and go there. So I found these photos through a local photographer that was at the border of Valeria, who he took it with his phone and he sent it to me. And I printed it 45 meter long on a tarp. And then with my team we drove there and we crossed the border walking with that giant tarp road like that. When we arrived there, some help from Ukrainian people came with their car and we drove to the biggest city on the west side of Ukraine. The idea of this technique is even if you don't have necessarily 200 people right away with you, you can find them and gather them. And so we went on one of the biggest places in front of the Opera House. As we started to open it, more and more people came and started helping, even soldiers and locals and people who were passing by. In the middle of the war, we were helping so that this image could open and the planes would see it and realize that they're also shooting on kids. It was quite an incredible moment, and that image after that time, we brought it back to France and we made it travel all over Europe. Then after that, I decided to make that banner travel all these different continents, in all these different camps or places where people are displaced, which are very different situations. So the show you're about to see here is the documentation of all those 5 different actions around the world with kids. Because the project is centered of kids, because at that age you don't realize the heaviness of the context that's around you. And you still have that innocence, still have that lightness around a conflict that they can't totally understand. And that's why the idea to carry those giant images with the whole community was a way to bring that energy around them, around those kids. It's for the first time you will actually see the 5 banners, the 5 tops that people have been carried, the original ones, in each of those countries on the square in the heart of Torino. And what people haven't noticed, because we've never done it, is to gather the 5 banners together. And when you bring those 5 kids together, it actually looks like they were photographed together and they were playing together. So I hope you enjoyed the exhibition, and I see you soon. Benvenuti alla mia esposizione qui a Torino, a Gallerie d'Italia. Non posso continuare in italiano, l'ho studiato a scuola ma l'ho un po' dimenticato, allora I will continue in English, and I hope you understand me, and thank you for coming to see the show. I want to tell you a bit of why I work on this project called Déplacé, Displaced, and how it started for me, growing up in the outskirts of Paris, being second-generation immigrants. It's a subject that had always touched me, and I always kept it in the back of all the work that I had done. I guess the first time that I started traveling, when I was doing the project called Women Are Heroes, I went all around the world in communities, photographing women and enlarging them bigger than nature, on trains, on floors, on buildings. But then I thought, okay, how can I make those actually image and story travel? And that's really what continued the whole core of my work, gathering people. And so the idea was to make their story travel. But I guess the first time that I walked on the Migrant series was in 2014 or 15 in New York, when I took that photography of this kid from Azerbaijan walking. At night, we pasted him with hundreds of volunteers in front of the Flatiron Plaza in the heart of Manhattan. The thing is, it was so big, and you can see it's little strips of papers that you put together to create that giant puzzle. The morning when people woke up, it was so big that they didn't even notice that they were walking in the image. So I went in a helicopter to take a photo from above, and from up there, actually, he was shining in the light and everyone else was in the shadow. And that image then made it to the cover of the New York Times. Then slowly, the more people would walk on it, and the more the image would disappear. And that's really part of my work. It's the ephemerality of it. In 2014, I did a project on a container ship. I pasted a giant container ship in Le Havre, one of those boats that's
Ragazzi, salutiamo e andiamo a vedere la mostra. Questa è la spiegazione che JR dà come benvenuto e introduzione alla sua mostra. Vi saluto.
that told me that they could help me find those containers.